Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of my series of videos where we're talking about my preparations for doing live performances at the Rogue Festival and beyond that. So last time we talked about how I might be able to get the sound sources that I need. My music uses pipe organ sounds, but that's where its similarity to what we ordinarily think of as pipe organ music ends. My music is much more in the realm of electronica. I refer to it as ambient post-rock electronica. And I'm just using pipe organ sounds really as the original sound, and then I'm augmenting those sounds in a number of interesting ways. Now, of course, when we're doing multi-track recording in a studio environment, whether that studio environment is a big physical studio like Maximus Audio out by the airport, or if it's just a room like this with a computer in it that I can record directly into, the studio environment through multi-tracking allows me to do pretty much anything I want. Now, when I'm creating the music inside that studio environment, I always have in the back of my mind, how am I going to do this live? Now, last time we looked at the various ways I used layering effects in order to build up really textured rhythmic patterns, and how in the studio I can just do that track by track. But in a live performance, I've got to use some kind of looping device. And this is a real simple looper that I've used for some of my music doing live performances, and it works beautifully. I also have to have then an effects processor, an external effects processor, that will do the various effects that I get in the studio to augment the sound with. This is from TC Electronics. I have two of these, and they're really handy because each of them is actually two effects processors. One does various effects like delay and that kind of thing. The other one is doing reverb effects, and so these are really handy. They can be controlled by MIDI, so when I'm at the keyboard I can have just a MIDI foot switch to go to the next preset and all of those kinds of things. So the equipment exists out there for me to do my music live. Now today what we're going to really dig into is looping, and in order to really make my music work in a live environment, there's a particular looping device I have to have that is the Boss RC600. This device is made by the Roland Company, and it is a multi-track looper. It is also a multi-layer effects processor, and it's a 8x8, meaning 8 inputs, 8 outputs, MIDI audio interface. Now, basically what this device does is it gives me one external device that, regardless of what my sound source is, if I'm using a small organ, if I'm using an organ emulator keyboard, if I'm using the software program called Hopwerk, whatever, I can go into this device and I can get all of my looping done. Looks like I can get all of my effects processing done, and if I am using that computer software, I have to have some kind of external audio interface, and this device will do that as well. So let's take a look at why that's important. So a lot of my music involves just layering a series of events. We took a quick look at that in the beginning of part 1, where I showed you how on the multi-track recording I put in an element, and then I layer another element on top of it, and layer another element on top of it, and layer another element on top of it. With a simple single track looper like this, I can do that beautifully. I just tell it to record, tell it to overdub the next thing, tell it to overdub the next thing, and then I have that stack of loops all in this device. I can pause it, I can recall it later. So there's a great deal of stuff I can do with a little simple single track looper like this. The problem comes in when I'm doing different types of looping. Maybe I'm not layering, maybe I'm lining up different elements that have to be brought in and taken out at different times. And in that case, a single track looper won't do that, because once you've overdubbed a bunch of stuff in here, it's there, it's all stacked up. Some of my music involves I'll bring in an element and then play on top of that. Then I'll add an element to that and then play on top of that. And then maybe add a third element and play on top of that. Well, then maybe I want to subtract those out. Well, I can't do that if they're all stacked up as one thing. And that's where multi-track looping comes into play. Now, the next obvious question is, if I need to do that kind of thing, these are inexpensive. This is only about $100. Why don't I just get 2 or 3 of these and just set them up side by side? Well, because of human error, that simply will not work. And here's why. So let's say I set up a loop on this device and it's running along, and then I want to have an element that I can bring in and take out later. Well, let's say I go to a different looper and I put that in, and then maybe I go to a third looper and put that in. Sounds like that should work, right? Well, the problem is I nor anybody else cannot hit that pedal and start and stop it within the microseconds that it would need to be in order to remain synced. So what happens when you try to use separate loopers side by side to do something together is that, let's say I put this loop in and it's going away, and then I put this other loop in and it's going away, and they're doing just fine, right? If there's even a microsecond difference in the length of those loops, which there's going to be because I'm not perfect, right? Well, that microsecond is going to start stacking up, and then they're going to get out of sync. I've tried that, and it is surprising how fast 2 separate loopers will get out of sync with one another. Well, the solution to that is to have a singular looper that has multiple tracks like the RC600. And what that happens there is that once I do that first loop, I've established the length of my loop. I put in that second loop, and the machine is going to make sure that those loops start at the same time every time. All 1 through 6. That's called quantizing. And that way I can do looping not only in stacks, but I can do them also stacks in the other direction in order to create the various looping effects that I use. When you add to that the fact that the Boss RC600 is also a multi-effects processor and could theoretically replace all of these, and it's an audio interface in case I end up using a computer as my sound source, it really becomes the most cost-effective solution, and therefore really the one piece of equipment that I absolutely must have. The sound source, I've got 4 or 5 different ways I can solve that. All of the other gear, I have most of it, or there's several different ways you can approach those problems. But the looping, I absolutely need a multi-track looper, and with everything taken into account, the RC600 is really the best bet. Now, the RC600 is not cheap. It's a $700 piece of equipment. But you know, when you consider everything that it will do, in order to buy individual pieces of equipment, if I buy a looper and then a separate effects processors and separate audio interfaces, I'm going to spend a lot more than $700. Now, the other neat thing that's going on right now is Sweetwater Music has the RC600 on sale for $100 off, $600, and but I'll have to get the money together before the 15th, and I'm self-employed, so and I'd have to have some work fall my way in the next few days in order for that to happen. But you know what? Who knows? It may happen. So at any rate, that's the next part of the puzzle that needs to be solved is how to get that RC600. It's the one piece of equipment that I have to make my particular style of music work. So that's it for today. I hope you're going to join me at the Rogue Festival if you happen to be in the Fresno area. And I will be recording the show, and I'll put that up on YouTube and make that available later on. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to getting back out in public and performing music live. And this will be the first time I've performed original music live in a very, very long time. Thanks for joining me today. And in part 3, we're going to look at some other elements about how I'm putting my live performance rig together and making it all work for the Rogue Festival and beyond. We'll see you next time.